Action. Okay. Translators? You okay? Great. In order for me to sort of convey some very important parts of this way of working, I need to talk about what's up there, working with feedback. So far, I've spoken about what we try to do as therapists. The next part is to talk about the families and how dependent I'm upon the families in order to do this kind of work. But I just, if you look at this picture, this is nothing to do with work. This is a commercial again on my country. This picture is from December or January. It's taken with the house where I used to live. There's been a change in temperature from around 0 to 10 minus. So what happens is that what you see on the tree is not snow, it's frost. And it's very beautiful. Look at it's like if the Amazon was covered in white, frosty, small crystals. So this is the Norwegian winter. But I must say that I could get used to a Brazilian winter, really, when I'm outside. I probably had to work a bit on it. When it comes to the Brazilian summer, I probably had to train more. Okay, so I'm going to talk about working with feedback. If this becomes a bit technical, I'll try to give content to it, because I have to talk a bit about psychotherapy research. That from and I'll see if we can, at the end, open for questions and comments, but because I really need to tell you about this, I'm waiting a bit for opening up for questions, if that's okay. Okay, so could we take the next slide? Just drop that. Go one more. Thanks. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going to explain what's up there. You know, when they started, they've been researching psychotherapy since the 50s. It started with a guy, one of the guys was Eysenck, who basically found that psychoanalysis and standing on the wait list had the same effect. This made a lot of therapists wonder, what is this? So it spurred a lot of research. Now we know that Eysenck was wrong. It's very clear that what we call psychotherapy works. It helps a lot of people. We also know that it's very difficult to differentiate methods. There is no huge difference between cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapies, humanistic therapies, existential therapies, systemic therapists. The effect is broadly the same. There could be some research pointing to that if you have a phobia, maybe systematic exposure is better, but again, it's very small differences. So we have this fantastic situation. Psychotherapy on the general level seems to help better than non-therapy. But what kind of therapy you do doesn't seem to have much importance. So that's the general situation, I think, when it comes to research. At the same time, so that has spurred, for instance, if some of you have met the word common factors, that something is the same across methods. I think that researchers still quarrel and struggle with this. The most important knowledge that I think we have from psychotherapy research is that when you use a method that's been said to be evidence-based, it's run through an experiment, what we call a randomized control trial, and you find that the investigated method it's better than another method, or waiting list, for instance, you still have the situation that there are some people who are not helped. So let's see, you give cognitive therapy to people with depression. Let's see that the finding is that 60% is helped, 40% is not helped. This means that when you meet a person with a diagnosis of depression and you choose cognitive therapy, you will not know if it helps or not. Because you have to find out the actual person in front of you. Is he or she in the group who are helped, or he or she in the group that is not helped? So the most important knowledge we now have is that when you have an evidence-based method, it is evidence-based that somebody is not helped. Now in Norway we've had a culture that I guess you also have in Brazil, because it's all of us as psychotherapists have been part of this culture. And it's been a culture that's brought forth through good intentions. But the culture is that when a person is helped by the method, we explain it with the method. When the person is not helped by the method, we explain it with the patient. We say that the patient was unmotivated, not accessible for treatment. I don't know if any of you have met this word, mentalization. Peter Fonagy, psychoanalyst, psychotherapy researcher, talks about something called mentalization. The ability to see yourself from the outside and the other from the inside. I've discovered that colleagues argue that you can't do psychotherapy with this father or this mother because he or she lacks mentalization capacity. I think it's both a clinical and ethical problem that we use the theory of the method to explain why people don't change. The research for me points to the fact that when a person is not helped, that means that you have to change method. You have to find another way. Think of cancer. If cancer health personnel treated cancer that, this form of cancer is helped by this medication, but this patient was not helped, it was due to motivation or some kind of intrinsic aspects of the patient, we would say that is absurd. I know what we mean about motivation, I know what we mean about resistance, and these concepts can be useful if they help us to change as therapists. But they've been used too much to blame clients and to exclude clients from treatment. So, what the researchers started to be interested in is that we know that this works on the general level, but we also know that a lot of actual particular client is not helped. So what should we do in this situation? If you look up here, this is a study of 6,000 patients in an outpatient clinic in Ohio, USA, done by Michael Lambert and his group. On the right side, you see the word recovery. Think about your praxis. Some clients could fit some kind of criteria that we say that this person has recovered, has become well again, whatever that is. In this study, 14.1% reaches the criteria of recovery. The next is improvement. We have clients people who meet us. You can't say that they've gotten rid of the mental problem, but they are still much better than they used to be. So there is improvement. 20.9% reaches that criteria in this study. That means that 35% seems to have some kind of help from meeting people like us. 56.8, nothing happens. And worse, 8.2 get worse. That means that 65% is not helped. With children, this situation is worse. In the US, there are studies who show that children in the medical health care that is insurance-based for the middle class, upper middle class, the deterioration rate when you're in psychotherapy is around 14%. In the areas of poverty, where you have the kind of health care that Donald Trump would like to introduce, as I understand it, 25% gets worse while they're in psychotherapy. Every fourth child, it's not that they're not helped, but they get worse. It doesn't mean that psychotherapy necessarily makes them worse, but we don't manage to do anything that helps them in their process of experience worse. So researchers start to ask themselves, how can we increase the recovery and improvement group? And how could we, and to do that, we need to decrease the no change and deterioration group. So somebody got the idea, what would happen? Think about this, you're working with people, and every time you meet, it is easiest to think when you think about individual work, but it's the same thing you can do with families. Think that the client comes. The client fills out a very simple questionnaire, and you see that today the client has improved. So you could start to talk with the client. Am I going too fast? Okay, 2 minutes. Yes. So, you talk with each other. You talk with each other. Anything strange, things. So just talk about the weather. You can do that. Okay, so then, here we go again. You got translation on your ear? No? There. Okay, thank you. You ready, translators? Okay, so here we go. So, the situation is, what would happen, for instance, also, if you came to the session and you got information that the client was in no change, or was in deterioration, or was in improvement or recovery. So what they basically did was that they took the 65% out. And then the next slide please, next slide. They called this group not on track, N-O-T, not on track, 65%. They divided them into 3 groups. One group, the therapist was not giving feedback on what was happening with the patient. The next group was given feedback, and the third group was given feedback and something called clinical support tools. And if you can see the numbers, what happens is that when therapists are getting feedback, the deterioration group decreases, and the recovered and improvement increases. And this development is furthered when the therapist gets more information. Clinical support tools was information about therapeutic relationship, about social support, and a third thing that I don't remember, sorry. But the thing is here that when people like us get feedback on what's happening with people, for a lot of us, not all of us, the patients change, so it means that we must do something. So what this brought forth for me was that I thought I'd started this job to help people change. And it ends up with me having to change. And for all of you who have tried to change is not easy. It's hard work to change, especially on things that you really believe hard in. I mean, imagine a belief. I believe in evolution. If somebody said to me, you have to stop believing in that, I would have a very hard time. Yes, that's clinical support tools. That's the information about the therapeutic relationship, about social support, and I think the third is, I forget, I think it's about more diagnostic things. So, this says that it's important that we as therapists get feedback. Am I making it clear? Okay? Take the next slide. Okay. I'll talk. She's doing it, it's good. So, in 2001, I started in this group that I've been talking about, this team, and we had met a guy called Scott Miller. That's great. And they had developed some very simple tools for feedback. So this is one example of it. I don't know if you could see, but this is just a simple sheet of paper with 4 lines, which is 10 centimeters, and which we call a visual analog scale. The first is about how people, about themselves. What I'm going to do with these PowerPoints, I'm going to give them so you can get the PowerPoints, so you will see this better later. I clarify and how you can get access to them. But the first is simply, I ask the patients, what about you? What are your feelings about yourself? I don't know how you have it, but let's see. Some Mondays I wake up, I go to the bathroom, I look in the mirror and I think, gee, I like that guy. I feel good. I'm looking forward to go to work. I would score the first line to the right. Just make a mark on this first line. There are other Mondays when I look at myself in the mirror. Maybe I've been to a party and had too much beer, for instance, and I said, Rolf, this is no good. You have to do something with your life. I don't like you in the way you do with your life. So I would score on the left side. The next line is about family. How is my relationship with my family? We know that sometimes the spouse, we have a good relationship, other times it's bad. Sometimes I worry about the children, sometimes I'm very happy with the children. The third line is about network, the job. If it's a kid, it's about school. If it's a person who stays at home, it would be how it is to stay at home. And the last one is an overall category. Think about how you feel today. If you would give a mark on a 10 centimeter line where good is on the right and bad is on the left, how do you feel? What would be your place to mark? So I invite the patient to do this. I take a ruler and I measure. Every line is 10 centimeters, so the maximum score is 40, minimum score is 0. The lower the score, the higher the lack of well-being. So, this is created for adults. If you take the next slide. This is a child's version of the same, which is simpler. We use smiley faces. If you take the next slide. Next slide. This is for the youngest children. We can't compute any data from that, but the children. So I have a small girl who marked the smiley face, but said there is no nose. So we have to draw a nose on everybody. So suddenly I started to talk with this 5-year-old girl about noses. And I agree that it's very shameful that we create faces without a nose. Actually, there's no ears either. So we could put some ears on, and yes. So if you take the next slide. So this is basically the same form. This is hard to see, but imagine this, there's a line here that is difficult, but I'll try to visualize. You have a grid like this. In the middle there is a black line. Just the black line is where the line of the TV screen is. That's at the point 25. So those who score below 25 usually score as people who have a mental challenge or problem that or suffering. Those who score above 25 is scoring like you usually do when life is okay. So basically what I do is that I measure each score, and I can make a point in each of these small squares. Today the patient scored 10, the next session it's 9, the next it's 4, the next it's 15, so I can make a trajectory. And the definition of recovery is to move from beyond the black line, below 25 to above 25. That is the operationalization of recovery. Improvement is more than 5 points upwards. No change is to be within the same range all the time. And deterioration is more than 5 points down. So we started to use this. None of us was any good with numbers. None of us did like these forms, but we discovered some things with these. I'll just show you another thing. If you go to the next slide. At the end of the session, there is another form based on the same principle, 10 lines. No, 4 lines with 10 centimeters. The first is about, was I able to listen and respect you? That's on the right side. On the other side, I was not able to listen and respect you. The next is about, did we work on the goals that we agreed on? We did not work on the goals. The third is about, we used the way of working that we decided on. We did not use it. And the last one is, overall today, the conversation was okay, or it was not okay. So I start with the first form in the beginning, and I end the session with this. So, when I started so you can use these in a very different ways. You can collect data, you can do a lot of research if you have a computer program. But we were not specifically interested in research, and we was not interested in actually the numbers. What we was interested, we discovered some things. So if you could take the next slide. And the next, this is a child version. Next slide. So it stuck. Next slide. So, what we discovered, that when we used these scales with the families, they opened up opportunities for conversations. So instead of talking about them as measured or tests, we started to talk about them as conversational tools. And we said that they are opportunities for questions, not answers. These scales does never give any answers. They are only opportunities for me to start to ask questions. What does this score mean? You're low here. And then the family or the client has to tell me what this is all about. So, and it's very important that we as therapists do not conclude or create meaning too early. Basically, we let the family conclude and create meaning. But the idea of a conversational tool was very important for us. So this was the first rule we developed. Usually psychologists use tests, and tests give answers to psychologists, which leads to interpretations that again leads to judgments on what to be done and not. We do not use them in that way. We simply use them as opportunities for conversations. Now, under conditions of detrimental development and lack of change, we said that this prioritizes therapist change. So this is the move. Usually I was trained that when the client didn't change, we had these meetings where we had all these hypotheses of what was wrong with the client, what kind of psychological mechanisms that was ruling this. There were conscious things, there were unconscious things. There were all kinds of things that we started to discuss. And usually we ended up with the conclusion that therapy was not very likely to succeed in this case. So what we said that instead of focusing on the client, we need to focus on ourselves. What could we do differently? The last one was that sometimes there are things that I really believe. I mean, I'm a believer. It's very easy for me to believe things. So there is a agreement between, for instance, the father, mother, and me on what we should do. So what we know that there is a power differential between us as therapists and the family, and usually the power differential is that we are in the power position. I know that when a mother talks to a person in the bureaucracy, she's not listened to. If I use the completely same words as the mother, I'm listened to. This is about power. So in order to try to, I don't think we can get rid of the power differential, but I think we can reduce the position we are in by stating that under condition of disagreement, we should give the word to the family within ethical reasons. I mean, I had a father who said to me, Rolf, why don't you let me hit this boy twice? Because that was what my father did with me when I did bad things. And look, I'm an okay guy. And I said, yes, I see that you are an okay guy, but our experience is that hitting children doesn't seem to work well. It might have worked well with you, and in addition, by Norwegian law, it's not allowed to do it. And for me, also for ethical reasons, I will not accept it. So, sorry, I will not follow you there. So there are some limits which has to do with violence and transgressions and these kinds of things. But I think it's very important that as we as therapists think about this power differential, and within ethical limits, we've been working a lot with trying to follow the family. This also means that what I told you before the coffee break, all the things that we have good intention of doing, if we actually manage to do it, is not to be decided by us, but by the family. If I think I've created a good relationship and nobody else notices it, it is irrelevant. So in that sense, we are in the power of our clients, and I think that's a good thing. Okay, next PowerPoint. Is it stuck? Is it problems to get the next PowerPoint? Okay. I'm looking at the time, so I'll just skip these, but just basically tell you a bit about this. I interviewed the families. What would the families think about our way of working when we work feedback? So what I found was that one process was that the family said, oh, we don't know what to talk about, we were a bit anxious, and then you gave us these forms, and it got us going. And it led up to that we started to think about what are we satisfied with, what are we not satisfied with, what do we want different, what should be stay the same, and we could talk about that. So that's what feedback is all about. But there is also another process. I don't know if you have these families or clients who come and they have nothing to say. They fill out the form. I look at the form, I ask them, can you tell me about the score? And they say, basically, I'm not sure why I scored the way I did. I had a father who was scoring very low on work. And I asked him, what is it about work? And he said, I don't know, I'm very happy at job. And I said, but it's lower than the other score, so it seems to me that there might be something that made you score. And he said, well, I haven't thought about this, but actually 2 months ago, my boss came and said that the firm was going bad and we might have to do some redundancies to fire somebody. And I'm the last to be hired, so I was very scared I would lose my job. But then things kept going good again for the firm. But I realize now that I've had this in the back of my head. What would happen if I lost my job? So that's sort of a movement from the non-said to the said. That these scales sometimes help us to put things into words that people don't really have words for, but as you all know, there's a lot of situations where I have bodily sensations and I don't really know what this is about. And gradually, if people ask me questions and I can sort of think, then gradually I find some words that fits to this position. So that's one kind of family, or one kind of talking process that they've helped us to. It helps us to get feedback. How is this going? It helps us to put things into words. But there is also another kind of family that I've met where the family comes and they are all talking. And they all say the same thing, but we need change. But they all have different things that want to be changed. There has to be done something with the school. We have to do something with this boy. My husband drinks too much. My wife is scolding me all the time. I'm afraid of job. Our economic situation. You know, it's a family in full crisis. And when they come to us, they really say, take it away. We need somebody to take all this away. I usually say to families then that listen, I'm just a simple psychologist. And in addition, I'm a man. That means that I can only do one thing at a time. So, given this terrible situation you are in, and I really understand that if I was a magician, I would take this all away, but I cannot do that. But tell me, is there one thing that we should do now, right now, that would be one step towards feeling better? So I have this story. In Norway, we have these situations where neighbors have a garden and there is a lot of trees, and on the border between two families, there is this tree that one family is very proud of, and the other family is very angry because it's stealing all the sun. And we don't have that much sun. So one family wants it cut down, the other says no. That's a typical Norwegian neighbor quarrel. This one tree, let's find the reason to grow up just on the limits, border between these two families. So I was working in an acute ward taking crisis. So this couple comes. The man is very agitated. He tried suicide. And when I started to interview them, I get this story that everything is chaos. Economy, relational life, school for the children. And I get this feeling that if anything should happen here, I should take it all away. So I say to this father that, listen, I can do all this, we need time, but is there one thing I should do right now that would be helpful? And he was silent and he said, can you call my neighbor? I said, call your neighbor? Yes, can you call my neighbor? And I said, why, what's happened? And he said, in Norway, when you are a frustrated male, you sometimes go in the garden and you have a chainsaw and you start to clear down what you should have done weeks ago in order to have a nice garden. So this guy, in order to sort of counteract his inner turmoil, starts the chainsaw and starts to clear the garden. And then he comes to this tree that's on the border between him and his neighbor, and he thinks, I hate that tree, and he cuts it down. Then the neighbor comes running, angry, and screamed at him, what have you done with the tree? And this guy said, what I did was I took the chainsaw and he lifted it in front of the man and he boom. So the neighbor got very scared, turned around and ran away because he was afraid that the guy wanted to cut his head off. So I said, but what do you want me to do? He said, could you call my neighbor and tell him that I'm in a mental crisis? I really want to say I'm sorry for this, but I need 2 weeks to calm down. So I grabbed the phone. I said, do you want me to call now? Yes. He said, I grabbed the phone. He gave me the telephone number. I call. There's this guy on the other end of the line, and I said, this is Rolf Sundet. I'm a psychologist at the acute ward, and I'm sitting together with your neighbor. And the guy said, yes, it's not my fault. That man is crazy. And I said, yes, that's why I'm calling, because your neighbor is very sorry for his reaction. He really wants to say excuse, so that he's sorry, but he needs 2 weeks. But he wants you to know that he will come and say, I'm sorry, but he needs 2 weeks in order to. So the neighbor said, okay, yes, that's it. That's an example for me that when you have these families in crisis, it's important to start a process that at least is one small step. And the last part of this is that when you use these scales, sometimes you discover things that you haven't, anybody has really thought about. It's sort of explorations. So it's two aspects with these scales. They are conversational tools. They help me to start conversation, but most of all, the feedback tells me, am I reaching my goal as a therapist? Am I actually managing to make my contribution into a good relationship? Am I actually managing to listen to people? Are the things we do something that is helpful or not? So from this point, I really have realized that I'm very much dependent upon my clients, and I'm very happy for that. It's a very, at least Norwegian culture has been very much concerned with autonomy, and autonomy is very important. But the opposite of autonomy is not to be dependent. I think the opposite of autonomy is sort of to be completely isolated or almost dead for that matter. Dependency and autonomy is two things that are good for each other, I think. Okay, so this is the idea of conversational tools. Next slide, just go, I dropped the next slide, so go beyond that. Go next slide, please. The therapist has also perspectives on this, but I'll leave that. So, the rule that we made was to follow the family. And this was the idea that the team was based on originally. So what does it mean to follow the family? For instance, we think that all perspectives are valid, but not necessarily equally useful. So it doesn't mean that therapists should be passive. We should give in our ways of thinking, but it's the family who decides what can be used. We try to give priority to the family perspective. We try to take both a not knowing, but also what I call a worrying position. Usually a good start place for family therapy is to ask, when they come to therapy, is not to ask what is the problem, but to ask, I've learned this from Peter Rober, Belgian family therapist, that he defines family therapy as a place where families can discuss worries. And usually there is one person who is more worried than others. So you ask, are there anybody in the family worried? Who is the most worried? Is there somebody who is not worried? And then you set up a discussion around these worries. So it's very important to cherish people's worries. But also I get worried as a therapist sometimes. Is this thing we are doing together with the parents good for the child? Is the changes we managed to induce in the school good for the child? So there's good, to be a bit worried is an important part. And I think Jaakko Seikula, who's created Open Dialogues, also have this as a starting position. We are very cautious about explanations. Over the years, explanation doesn't help me much in this job. Explanations, what I like is much more to look at connections, to hear people's descriptions. It's very strange. In order to make an explanation of psychotherapy, we need to do a randomized control trial. But in therapy, we do explanations all the time. Explanations is basically, for me, productions of myths. Now, myths can be very important. They can help me to act. So the good thing for me with theory and explanation is that if they suggest ways of acting together with the family to see, is this helpful, then I would accept explanations. But explanations that excludes actions is no use, I think. As I've said, it's important that the therapist is active and transparent and that we make the knowledge available for the families. Repair work is crucial. We do mistakes. I mean, the basic thing of learning is to do mistakes. So if I want to learn to be a good therapist, I will make mistakes. But I need to discover these mistakes and then enter them into a conversation with the family and explain and say that I thought this and this, I was wrong, I'm sorry. So one of the most important conversational things that a therapist can do is to say, I'm sorry, I got lost. We could do things differently. And I also think that I would really like to understand others, and I would really like people to understand me. But the problem with psychology is that we've used psychological theories to understand other people. And theory is always some kind of generalization, and it always has some explanations. So for me, explanations really could be an intrusion. I remember when I started to work as a nursing assistant in mental hospitals, there were some psychiatrists and psychologists when we went to a party. They looked at you as they really understood what this was all about. And I didn't have a clue what it was about. I was really feeling sort of put down by their so-called understanding of me. Now, psychological and theoretical understanding is always a reduction. So I'm much more interested in, instead of trying to understand each of you, I would like you and me to understand something together. That is another position. The family comes. My job is not necessarily to create a theoretical understanding of the family. My job is to, together with the family, create an understanding of their situation that could help them in their predicament. Okay, take the next slide. I'll see I'm ending soon. Yes, there's two ways. Think about, there are methods, theoretically methods, like for instance cognitive therapy. Cognitive therapy builds on the idea that thoughts creates feelings. So if you change thinking, you will change feelings. That means that when you are a cognitive therapist, it's important that the client say yes to this understanding. So you need psychoeducation to make the client understand what cognitive therapy is all about. And if the client follows the theory, you increase the probability that the person will be helped. But if the client says no, it's very easy to think that this client is unmotivated, resistant, and all these kinds of concepts. For me, I usually say that motivation is an irrelevant concept for me in this work. Motivation has usually to do with, I used to work with drug addicts, and I realized that they are the most motivated group I've worked with. The problem was that they were very motivated for other things than me. In Norway, when I worked with them, they were very motivated to stop drugs, stop heroin by using methadone. Nobody wanted to give them methadone. Today, everybody's getting methadone and their life condition has changed. So it's nothing wrong. This is one way of working, but what I've tried to tell you is about another way of working, where I'm completely dependent upon the client saying no, that the clients are hesitant, that the client is willing to protest. Because when the clients say no, I know what not to do. It doesn't mean that I know what to do, but at least I know what I shouldn't do. So then I can start a conversation with the client that if we shouldn't do this, have you any ideas? And the client says something, I don't have a clue, and I say, but has you had any experiences where things are good for you? And he said, yes, I do yoga. And then we're on the path to investigate what is it good with yoga, or running, or be with my mates at the pub, or whatever. So what I've tried to tell you about, I'm not against these methods you need to say yes to, but my way of working is that I'm dependent upon the client to be hesitant, and that we build therapy together, and in order to do that, I'm completely dependent upon feedback. Okay, I'll stop there. Could you just do 2 minutes to each other and then see if there are some questions? Mm-hmm. Do that, and I'll just check something up here. So talk a bit with your side kick. Thank you. Okay. Just to invite you for comments. Clara, up on the top.
Lá. Eu queria que o professor comentasse um pouco. Eu achei muito interessante esses estudos com feedback para os terapeutas. Eu trabalho num ambulatório e um dos problemas são abandono dos pacientes. E se a gente fizer uma reflexão mais profunda, a gente vai entender que os pacientes que abandonaram não foram ouvidos. Eu gostaria que o professor comentasse um pouco como que está inserido o ambulatório lá nas redes na Noruega e também se esse sistema de feedback ajudou nos abandonos, os pacientes que abandonam os tratamentos. Obrigado.
The way I understand the question of abandonment is the client falling out of treatment, not coming back? Is that what you mean? Or the other situation that we stop treatment at some point and then just forget them?
O paciente abandonou o tratamento. Provavelmente parou, e o paciente parou,
Yes.
né, mesmo sem melhorar. Né?
What the research say is that this feedback method is one way of reducing abandonment and that people drop out of treatment. So this is one. This research points to that. It's very important to keep clients in treatment until they say to you, I think I'm going to stop treatment now because situation is okay. So when we worked with, I have experiences that we hardly ever had any people dropping out. But this was due to more than feedback for us because we gave the client an opportunity to call us when they need us. So basically, I used to say to my bosses that stopping contact is overrated. Let people take contact when they need it. But generally in psychotherapy research, the finding is very clear. You reduce dropout. Okay. Any other comments?
O senhor poderia falar um pouquinho para nós a respeito do contexto de urgência e emergência lá na Noruega?
The work that I've been doing is not emergency work. But what we have in Norway is that we have acute wards for adolescents and children. And where I used to work, we had this very nice acute ward which basically combined outpatient work, ambulant working at the parent's home, and also hospitalizing in a bed if that was necessary. What seems to have happened in Norway now is that they're going back to a more traditional outpatient or a more traditional acute ward where kids are admitted. Children are very seldom put in an acute ward, but adolescents are. And there is much focus on assessment and diagnostics before they start treatment. This place in my city, who for a period was very good, was much more into creating a collaborative relationship, deciding with the family. For instance, they work with suicidal kids, so they take them in. There is an assessment of the risk, but at the same time talking with the kids. If you're allowed to go home with the parents, what kind of agreement should be made? What kind of emergency possibilities was there for the parents to call, and continuously see what kind of conversation could be set up about the. I mean, suicide for me is always a response to some kind of predicament in the life of the person. It's basically to stop something, to stop the pain. But we have these acute wards that, and the process of getting is that the parent is worried, my daughter is going to kill herself. You go to the primary physician, he makes a first sort of evaluation, he say this is a high risk, then you go to the acute ward, they do a new assessment, and then you're admitted into the ward. Was that an answer? Other? We're getting close to 5. You've been, here's a hand here.
Thank you. Obrigada, professor, por essa palestra, por essa fala. Meu nome é Jéssica, eu sou uma psicóloga, trabalho em contexto hospitalar. Eu fiquei pensando bastante a respeito do que o senhor falou sobre a necessidade de quebrar regras e sair do protocolo em algumas situações. E eu fico pensando que isso é muito importante também porque a gente sai normalmente da nossa formação, né, da graduação, muito engessado em termos de prática, né, muito fechado. Eu queria que o senhor contasse, expandisse um pouco nisso, né, em que situações o senhor acha que é importante essa quebra de protocolo, quebrar com as regras, e como que foi esse processo para o senhor também, ao longo do seu processo de formação, de ir descobrindo isso. Obrigada.
First of all, it's much more easy for me as a 63-year-old clinical psychologist at the end of my career to break rules than for a newly educated person. So this is an important. I usually joke and say that the court case would take probably 2 or 3 years, and then I would be retired, and I could say, "I'm sorry, I lost my way," and you know. But so I will not say that you should break the law, but I think there are some rules. For instance, if a kid responded bad to assessment, for instance, I would stop doing assessment. I would probably have to write in the medical journal that for treatment reasons I choose not to do assessment. So that is one kind, and I would, for instance, in Norway you have to give a diagnosis within certain days, but if there were reasons for not doing it, I would break that. But I would probably, with those kinds of things, make a comment in the medical journal. So I could, in Norway you have to make a rationale for what you do like you do. But then there are other types of rules, for instance, the kind of recommendation we get from our government that if you have this and this diagnosis, you should use this and this method. I would break those kinds of rules. There are rules about how long they could be in treatment. I would break those kinds of rules. What we've done in the team that I've been working, I've been interviewing my colleagues, trying to make a map of where we had the feeling that we were breaking the rules. For instance, one of the rules was that every client should have we had an electronic calendar, and everybody should have a date for the next session. But our families had much help in not having a session, but having the opportunity themselves to decide when they wanted a session. So we broke that rule, and that was sort of actually quite serious rule, because but my argument was that this is a very important therapeutic move to allow the clients and families to decide when to go back. So I refuse to put up. So there are, and so I think there are, the reason why we started to talk about the breaking the protocol was that we had these feelings that we were doing something wrong when we were helping people. I usually joke, if anybody have heard about Foucault's The Panopticon, you know, Foucault, French guy who talks about that we are policing ourselves. The state doesn't any longer have to look after us because we are so afraid to break rules that we are our own police, and we even punish ourselves when we get back from work and have bad conscience because you didn't do the proper diagnosis. All these feelings that we have when we have a feeling of doing mistakes, when we actually try to help people, have to be documented. And we have to say to ourselves, it was a good thing that I broke the rule, but at the same time, I have this, my boss in my head who say you shouldn't do these things. But so the important thing, I think, with going out of the protocol is that when you do something in order to help somebody, you get feedback that this is help, then I would say, to swear again, screw the protocol. The time is, it's 5 o'clock, so I'm going to stop. I wanted to give you one picture of a Norwegian summer. So this is a good Norwegian summer. Thank you for your attention.
Eu acho que foi uma tarde super rica para a gente, né? A gente sai cheio aí de questões e de motivações. Queria agradecer muito o professor Rolf por estar aqui com a gente hoje, compartilhando tantas experiências, né, com a gente. E, bom, eu acho que eu só tenho a agradecer mesmo, eu fico sem palavras, porque estou acompanhando agora o professor desde a semana passada e a gente tem aprendido tanto com ele, né? Tem sido uma oportunidade tão rica de trocas. E eu fico muito grata mesmo por você estar aqui com a gente hoje. Espero que retorne ao Brasil mais vezes, para que a gente possa estar trocando mais. E agradeço a todos também pela presença aqui hoje. Desejo uma boa tarde a todos. Obrigada, professor.